So I am very excited to talk about 2020. I can't stop talking about 2020. The fact that we
It's
have all
your
these
job to
people
talk
here, it's my
2020.
job to talk 2020. I know, but it's so much more interesting than other things we could be talking about. But anyway, I am very excited to talk about 2020, and then we are specifically today taking a lens on the Democrats, not necessarily the specific candidates, although we can talk about some of those, but really the larger issues that are either challenging the Democrats or maybe where their blind spots are, and the expectations for Democrats going in 2020. There are two schools of thought, it seems to me, when I talk to Democrats about the 2020 election, and the folks in that so-called Acela corridor from the New York to DC. One is, how can Democrats not win, okay? You have a president right now who is sitting at 42%. He has yet to hit 50%, the first president never to hit 50% approval rating in Gallup polling. He has never been above water. In other words, he's never had a higher job approval than disapproval rating in any poll taken since he was inaugurated. The economy's doing very well. At least there's a good tailwind behind the economy, and yet his approval rating's 42%, 43% on a good day. And if you look at the 2018 elections, Democrats won the national popular vote by 8 points. And in those blue states that they lost, that Hillary Clinton lost in 2016, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, Democrats ran the table. They just hold those 3 states and maybe even pick up Arizona, a state that Democrats won in 2018, in the Senate race there, okay? That's 289 electoral votes. It's done, it's over. But then there's the other school of thought among Democrats, which is this. Yeah, everything looks great, but Democrats are gonna find a way to F this up. Because that's what Democrats do, okay? It all looks so good and so easy, and here's what they're going to do. They're going to do one of two things. They're going to put up the wrong candidate. They are going to fight. And we have a 23-candidate field now. Maybe it will be bigger by the time this panel ends. It's 25. Jeez, okay? There'll be infighting and bruising and battling, and the party will not unify in time, a la 2016. And that President Trump, as he has been able to do very well, is to make Democrats fight on his turf and to basically dictate the rules of the game. And when Democrats are responding to Trump, they are at a deficit, or they're playing on his terrain, they lose. So what this panel is going to do is actually to take a look at whether that actually makes sense. And each person on this panel has had an opinion about where Democrats, what they need to do and what they need to avoid. And so just very quickly introducing these very smart, thoughtful folks. Jonathan Capehart, sitting closest to me, editorial writer for The Washington Post. You've seen him on TV a lot, especially on the MSNBC network. Jamel Hill, who is with The Atlantic, formerly of ESPN. Adam Gopnik, who is with The New Yorker. And Art Cullen here is with the Storm Lake Times of Iowa, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 2017, right? In 2017. So they all have brought some really interesting, they have some interesting perspectives to bring to the table. So here's where I want to start, and Jonathan, just because you're closest to me, you start, I know.
I knew when I took this seat.
You shouldn't have done it.
No.
All right. And everybody else can go. You don't have to go in order, but
I yield the floor to
Art.
Art.
Yes, you can yield the floor. The biggest fissures within the party, okay, thinking about where the Democratic Party is now, are the fissures within the party the ones that could be the most problematic or have the most potential to do either short-term damage, i.e., prevent Democrats from winning in 2020, or longer-term damage, i.e., where does the party go even if they do win? Are these fissures ideological? Are they policy-focused? Are they racial? Are they generational? Which ones do you see as potentially the most important or the most problematic?
Well,
Or are there any?
I'm scrunching my face over
you
the
did
word, over the word fissures.
Okay.
Because I'm thinking,
should I
well,
use?
what do you mean? I mean, political parties are all about
Of course.
combat and fighting over ideas, and then whichever is the best idea or whoever is able to push their idea through, that's the one that is the idea of the party. I get uncomfortable with the notion that, broadly speaking, Republicans do it right. They never have fissures, or they never have fissures that heal, or they never have conflicts that don't end up being resolved. And Democrats are always this roiling chaos, which, I mean, Democrats live up to that reputation by and large. And I guess we'll talk about one of my admonitions to all of you who might be Democrats in this room.
Yes.
But I think the conversation that's happening within the Democratic Party, whether it's over single payer, whether it's over immigration, whether it's over abortion rights, climate change, you name it, the arguments within the party, generally speaking, are this thin. You don't have people in the party who are saying absolutely single payer and somebody else in the party saying, well, actually, no one should have health care. I mean, the Democrats are arguing over how best to bring health care to people, just to use one example. So I think that in the long term, in the short term, the conversation is very healthy, not just for the party, but for the country. And I think, obviously, in the long term, when you have a party that is actually arguing and debating ideas, and if that party then ends up controlling the levers of power, then those ideas, hopefully, knock on wood, get to have a hearing before the American people, and they get passed, and then they become law. I am not buying the argument that Democrats are so...
Dems in disarray.
Right, I mean, everybody's in disarray. I just don't buy the perennial every 4 years, and even during midterm election cycles, it's Democrats are in disarray. That's what they were saying to the 2018 midterm elections. Oh my God, they're running on impeachment. And I was like, I started thinking, who's running on impeachment? No, the only people talking about impeachment were Republicans and those of us on cable TV.
Right.
But
and Art, I want, do you want to finish that? Because, I mean, I'm sorry, not Art, Adam, I want you to weigh in on this, because there actually does seem to be a debate right now on the issue of impeachment. You've written a lot about this. And this battle over the quote-unquote moral/constitutional issue versus the political and the short-term...
The prudential.
And right.
Yeah, I did a piece for the New Yorker. I normally call it the magazine, but in this context, we can't call it the magazine. We have to call it the other magazine. I did a piece trying to lay out both cases as eloquently as I could. Prudential case against impeachment, which is clearly the one that Nancy Pelosi is pursuing, which has a great deal of political logic on its side. Clearly a sense that since you know in advance that you will never actually have a conviction, that it's a form of self-abuse to push forward something which satisfies only you and has no potential of ever engaging any other. And I understand that. And against that, there's a principled argument to be made that Trump's crimes are of such gravity and so obviously conform precisely to everything that was meant by high crimes and misdemeanors when the framers framed the Constitution, and by what's been meant by high crimes and misdemeanors in every subsequent impeachment, much more so than in some, certainly more so than in any since Richard Nixon's perspective impeachment, that in some sense that the prudential argument has to collapse into the argument from principle. That the Democrats, the House of the Congress, has no choice in some deep sense except to impeach Trump.
And do you see a political consequence of that?
Well, when I laid out the argument, I guess it was about a month ago, I ended with classic New Yorker namby-pambiness and said the principled argument may yet become, the prudential argument may yet become the principled argument. The principled argument could actually, meaning impeach the guy, could become the prudential argument. So I pointed out one of the arguments against impeachment, which is essentially Nancy Pelosi's argument. She hadn't made it that explicitly at that moment, is, like an old westerns set in Colorado where they say, hanging's too good for that varmint, right? Impeachment's too good for Donald Trump. It dignifies his behavior in a way that expelling him would not. I have come to feel over the course of the past 6 weeks or so, with the Mueller report, with Trump's call, his invitation to Russia, to any foreign power, to openly interfere with the election, which parenthetically I think is an element in 2020 that we're blinding ourselves to the reality that there's no reason to believe that the election will be held on anything resembling fair grounds without outside interference of an extremely grave kind. I think that's, not only is it possible, there's been absolutely nothing done to prevent it from happening, and Trump is inviting that. So given the scale of the insults that are being offered every day to the most basic principles of liberal democracy, I find it increasingly hard to see how you could not act, even if the action is largely symbolic. It's a vital symbol to have. And my own experience, and I think people misremember both the Nixon impeachment, which I am old enough to remember, and the Clinton. Because the fact is that people all say, well, Clinton benefited from it. No, he did not. The Democrats benefited in the immediate congressional election, but there's no question that the 2000 presidential election was significantly warped and shaped by the impeachment. Joe Lieberman became the vice presidential candidate because he had spoken out against Clinton. And that's why Al Gore used him, and he turned out to be, in many respects, an inadequate vice presidential candidate, wasn't a bad fit, as we'd say. That campaign was fought on the grounds that the impeachment had revealed that people were tired. That was what the phrase was, we're tired of Clinton. So I don't see any evidence historically that you suffer from an unsuccessful impeachment particularly, and I see overwhelming evidence that if ever there were high crimes and misdemeanors committed by the president in power, this is that time.
Jamel, do you want to weigh in on this fissure debate and whether there is or isn't? Is it important? Is it not important? I mean, we hear a lot. There's generational divide.
Yeah.
I mean, and let's be really clear. I mean, we spend a lot of time, unfortunately, those of us who cover politics, responding to the last war, fighting the last war. That 2016 revealed these, I'm going to say it, fissures within the party that may still be around.
Well, I think we've all seen the one thing. I give the Republicans a lot of credit. They are great at changing the narrative, and they are really, really good at messaging. And the thing is, I don't believe that there's huge crack in the Democratic Party. Where they are failing, to me, is that what is really common sense centrist ideas, they're allowing them to be labeled as radical. Once Donald Trump threw out the label of socialism, or other Republicans following suit, throwing out socialism for things that I think we all basically agree on, it felt like a loss for the Democrats, because I don't think it's that crazy that that a lot of, people in this country really want to find a adequate, competent healthcare system. I think we all kind of want that, right? But it's being labeled as some radical concept like, oh, people want to be treated for, medical issues they have. That's too radical. It's like, nah, I think most people can get on board with that, even when it comes to education and even when it comes to race. So it's sort of this idea that there's this level of progressiveness happening that the older Democrats aren't for, and I find their ideals to be not that far apart. Bernie Sanders is 1,000 years old talking about canceling student loan debt. That is not a radical idea.
No, but he calls himself a socialist, so isn't that the issue?
Well, but
I mean, it's not like it's coming that they're making up the term socialist. He is embracing his identity as a democratic socialist.
Exactly. It's like, okay, if student loan debt is on the table,
I know,
as something that they can all agree we need to do something about, maybe in different ways, but as Jonathan said, it's not like there's any conflict in the party where one person wants something that's so crazy and everybody's like, no, I don't really want to do that. So they're not really good at messaging the fact that they have more in common than they do apart. And the Republicans are really, really good at leaping onto these non-controversies, making them something. Because to me, in their party, they don't have necessarily fissures, but you have a lot of people on board for abhorrent policy. And yet they're able to sell this so well because they're all unified in dumbness. And it's like, it's unbelievable. It's like, oh yeah, we're gonna all be on board with this, even though it's really stupid. It is a huge catastrophe, but they're all on board. So I think the infighting that is largely, it's the concept of it is largely self-inflicted, and it's just a matter of very poor messaging.
Art, I want to come to you because it does seem like one of the challenges that Democrats have they talked about immediately, or at least the media talked about immediately after the 2016 campaign, was the collapse of Democrats in places like you live, in rural Iowa, right? And we saw this all across the country, that areas that had once supported Democrats robustly, that had given President Obama their vote, that collapsed. And then in the 2018 election, some of those places did end up voting Democrat, but a lot of them continued to vote for Republican, continue to support the president. So I want you to talk a little bit about what the Democratic message in rural areas and how that may differ from, again, we had folks up here saying there's not much difference between what Democrats are saying. It's just it's minuscule. But if I go to your part of Iowa, is that how people see Democrats?
Well, I live in what I call a little slice of Texas in northwest Iowa, the 4th Congressional District, 39 counties, almost entirely rural. And our congressman is the most racist son of a bitch in Congress, Steve King. And so I'm coming at things from a warped perspective. I've been holed up there now, taking fire for 20 years. And
Let her rip, Art.
first of all, Hillary Clinton didn't show up in rural Iowa in particular. She never came to Storm Lake, my hometown, town of about 15,000 people with 3,000 registered Latinos. She didn't, and 2,000 college students didn't show up. And so she deserved to lose. And rural America has felt flown over and disregarded and disaffected for the past 50 years. And they kind of just got to the point with people like Steve King where he says all these outrageous things and he's straight about it. He doesn't give a damn what anybody thinks. And the same with Trump, and they're kind of like flipping the bird to the world. And people said, yeah, damn right, screw them. And that's what they did in 2016, and with Steve King, of course, a long time before that. He was sort of John the Baptist paving the way. And
But
go ahead, yeah.
But Art, to be blunt, when you say Steve King is the most racist congressman in Congress, which is in a highly competitive Republican field,
Louis Gohmert's giving him a good go.
Yes. And it's fun to see. It's like great horse race. Who can knows ahead? When you say, and I know I say this as a big city boy from Canada, so you can discount it.
Yeah.
In some ways. You say, well, they were giving the finger to the world, right? Yeah. But they voted. It's no accident that the way they gave the finger was by voting for two racists, for Steve King and Donald Trump. So I think to be blunt, it puts too pretty a face on it to say they felt ignored and therefore they were giving the finger to the world. They felt.
I'm not putting a pretty face on it until you ask me the question, all right?
Okay.
I was trying to talk until you asked a question.
Right. Okay. So
I'm
my
not putting
question
a pretty
is
face
right,
on anything.
Right. But my question is,
right.
Can you disassociate the racism of the congressman
Absolutely.
from the implicit
Absolutely.
racism of the...
Because the number one issue in Northwest Iowa is abortion. It's not immigration. 75% of people in the Des Moines Register's Iowa poll in the 4th District believe in a pathway to citizenship for undocumented people. About 90% favor a pathway for dreamers. So to say that Iowans are racist is not true. They were voting for Judge Kavanaugh and Judge Gorsuch. They weren't necessarily voting to build the wall. And I know you think I'm full of it, but
No, I don't. I'm genuinely trying to understand, right? But you think that there's a disconnect between the beliefs of the people in that district and the congressman.
absolutely. J.D. Scholten
Right.
came within 2 percentage points of Steve King in 2018 after he was making all the same comments that he's made for the past 20 years, but New York heard about it. Trip Gabriel heard about it, and all of a sudden it's news.
Right.
Steve King,
And
you
that's-
mean, was
Yeah.
making the same
No,
comments.
Trip Gabriel from the New York Times
Right.
made it a
Right.
story. But that's really Adam, let me reframe it a little bit, because I talk to a lot of folks in rural areas or who are in the community that's been really hurt by these tariffs. And you've written about this. You said at one point, Trump is wreaking havoc on the rural fourth CD with his trade wars, right? That they support immigration policies. So that, I think, is the question is that going to be enough to make those areas of the country say, I'm going to be voting with my pocketbook / the issues
I'm
that
hearing
are
it
personally
right now.
affecting me? Yeah.
We didn't get, these trade wars have knocked 30% off the price of soybeans. China is the biggest soybean market for Iowa farmers. Mexico is the top customer for Iowa farmers. These tariffs are killing them. People in the John Deere factory in Dubuque and Waterloo and Moline and Davenport are John Deere's issuing profit warnings now. Their profits are off because of higher steel costs. So it's not the farmers. Forget about the farmers for a second. It's the people in Dubuque. Dubuque came home in 2018 for Abby Finkenauer, unseated a Trump acolyte in the person of Rod Bloom, and she's the daughter of a union household in Dubuque. Because they've been getting the hell beat out of them by Trump, Dubuque came home. Waterloo, Cindy Axney won in Des Moines, and which was mainly a
Right.
rural district. And then again, J.D. Scholten came within 2.
Right. And so if the debate is, as Jamel pointed out, if the contrast in 2020 is Donald Trump and his policies that have actually had a real bottom line impact on you, or a crazy socialist, right, which is how Trump will, whoever the
Right.
nominee is, will get that moniker.
Right.
How do folks there respond to that?
Uh,
Because it wasn't a choice. It was a referendum on Trump in 2018. Now it's a choice in 2020.
Right.
Yeah.
If you look again at the midterms in the governor's race, Fred Hubble, the Democrat, lost to a cardboard cutout by the name of Kim Reynolds. And because he's a corporatist, he's a billionaire, and he's from Des Moines. And there was a guy named John Norris who probably could have beat Kim Reynolds. He's from rural Iowa and is a populist. Iowa's a populist state. That's why Elizabeth Warren's doing very well in Iowa.
In
Is
the
she going to
Democratic
win the
primary.
caucus?
And they elected Tom Harkin, who is a liberal
Yeah.
populist,
Right.
and then they elected Chuck Grassley, who's a conservative populist.
Right. Right.
Well, can I
Well,
just
I just ask quickly then? So do you think that a Democrat who can present himself or herself as a populist would actually have a chance of winning Iowa in
Yes.
2020?
Yes, because that's what Jimmy Carter sold, whether he delivered it or not, and Barack Obama sold the same thing. He didn't deliver it, but he sold it. And so, yes, Joe Biden's attractive to Iowans because he has a populist streak in him. And Elizabeth Warren is rising in the polls, and that's why Bernie did well in Iowa, because of populism.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't write off Iowa if I were the Democratic Party. I think I thought Clinton would win Iowa, but I was wrong. But I do believe that farmers are fed up with him.
Jamel,
Well,
yeah.
But the New York Times will always find a farmer with his MAGA hat. I'm sticking with it, by God.
I know, right?
You know, well, okay.
Well,
you know, I have a lot of friends who are redneck farmers who are fed up with him, and their wives think he's a sexist pig. So I think he's going to lose Iowa and Wisconsin. Wisconsin, again, has a very similar economic structure to Iowa: agriculture and heavy manufacturing, very export-based economies. And the same thing with Ohio.
So
and I think
Hold
it's a
on,
mistake to
Adam,
write
I
that
want
off.
Jamel to get in. Hold
No,
on.
what I was going to just ask Arthur is that like you just said a moment ago about how it would be unfair to characterize Iowans as racist just because they voted for Donald Trump. my question then is, if you're okay with racism, what are you? Because they had to be okay with it on some level. Because you can be a one-issue voter, and that's cool, and a lot of people are, and it's not restricted to Iowa. This is not picking on Iowa. But what I'm very frustrated by the framing of this election being framed around, quote, the forgotten people. You know who's forgotten? People in inner cities.
A lot of people.
Right?
Yeah.
A lot of people. They're not the only ones.
Yeah.
You know what they managed to do? Not vote for a racist.
Right.
Right? A lot of black people have been under the boot a long time.
And,
You know what they
Jamel,
managed to
that's
do? Not vote
But
for
can
Donald
What
Trump.
I'm trying to point out, what I was trying to point out is that immigration is a smokescreen. The real issue is abortion, and that's what motivates Iowans to vote Republican. They're Missouri Synod Lutherans, they're German Catholics, and they're Reformed Church Dutch people who will vote abortion, abortion, abortion.
And I totally get that.
Jamel, can I?
They just happen to be okay with racism.
They're not okay with
They are
racism.
okay because
Okay,
they
hold on,
Wait,
hold
can
on.
I, can I, can,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry, Amy, can I
Go
make I want to make a distinction here, and I make a distinction in this
They
way.
voted for Barack Obama twice.
Right.
Okay?
All right, I'm coming to kind of to your defense here. For people who voted for President Trump in November 2016, I completely get why you voted for him. Economic anxiety, you were forgotten, he talked to you in a way that politicians never talked to you before. He came to visit you, he visited the state more often than not, or many times than, say, Hillary Clinton. I get that. You walked into the voting booth, you voted for Donald Trump. However, if you are going to vote for Donald Trump in 2020, and this gets to Jamel's point, that's when I have a problem with the forgotten people, economic anxiety, because at this point, if you're still relying on economic anxiety to explain your vote for President Trump and what you're going to do in 2020, then that means you're okay with both sides had very fine people, and you're fine with Charlottesville. You're fine with baby jails on the border. You're fine with kids not being given soap and toiletries. The United States jailing children, seceding its role in the world. That, to me, is going to be the big issue. And so if anyone says that they are voting for Donald Trump in 2020, to me, they are saying, to Jamel's point, they're okay with racism and xenophobia and misogyny and nativism and white supremacy.
All right, can we?
Get back on track?
Yes.
Yeah, just for a second, because I want to get back and Art raised a good. I do want to get into the Midwest and the challenges there for Democrats, but I first want to talk about the person who's currently the front runner, Joe Biden. Okay, now Jonathan wrote a piece late November of 2018 saying, Democrats, y'all need to stop falling in love and just fall in line.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Yeah. You need to stop. You're not going to find the perfect candidate. There is no such thing. The number one priority is beating Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden is the front runner, in large part because people see him as the most likely to be able to beat Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. Jamel's argument, which I will read her quote here from her recent Atlantic article, Biden's elevation to frontrunner is a testament to how much Donald Trump has shaken the faith of those who believed the White House could better reflect what America looks like. So you are I want you to weigh in on
You want me to
that.
defend myself against
No,
Jamel?
I just want to know if at this moment Biden's role as the front runner.
Sure.
What does it tell us about the Democratic electorate and lining up, and also going to the point of if we were looking at 2016, we had a lot of talk about economic anxiety, people who felt left out, but the biggest drop off in participation from 2016 to 2020 were black millennials.
Uh-huh.
So is Joe Biden going to help solve that problem?
Well, we don't know yet because no one's voted yet, and we're
Well-
we're here in June of 2019. Yeah, he's the front runner now, but maybe after the debates this week he might not be. Then there's the debates in July. Then there are the debates in September. We've got 25 people who are running for president. The point of my piece back in November was to say, Democrats have this really annoying habit And that is, they're always looking for the one. And my the one is not like you're the one. And if my the one does not become the nominee, I'm not voting. And in fact, I'm going to talk crap about your nominee. And I'm going to go to newspapers, I'm going to go on television, I'm going to talk crap about this person. And then we all wonder, oh my God, why did the Democrat lose? Republicans, on the other hand, they're like, everybody, all come, all are welcome, run for office, and they talk crap about them during the primary. But once there's a nominee, they circle the wagons, and their number one job is to get that person elected. And the point of my piece was, Democrats, if there was ever an election to emulate Republicans, it's 2020. When people ask me, who's the Democrat who can win, who's the Democrat who can beat Donald Trump, I say the Democrat. And then they come back to me and they say, well, is it Joe Biden? Is it Elizabeth Warren? Is it Kamala Harris? What about Mayor Pete? And I say, the Democrat. If Democrats vote for the Democratic nominee for president in 2020, the Democratic nominee for president will be the president of the United States. However, to Amy's point, the whole reason why we are having this discussion is because Democrats are very adept at snatching defeat
From the
out of the jaws of victory.
So, Jamel, then you defend your piece about Biden.
I actually won't. I think Jonathan's totally correct about this. But while we're in the stages where we're swiping Tinder with these candidates, right? Where we're like, okay, we like you, we don't like you. I think it's fine to debate and split hairs a little bit in this current stage. My issue with Joe Biden is that there seems to be a lot of, well, I think he's the one that'll beat Trump. That shouldn't be the only standard for you winning the presidency. Like, I think you still have to present good ideas. You still have to, prove that you're, progressive, and you still have to be able to present policies that make sense. And Joe Biden, to me, is getting a huge pass for a lot of things because he is obviously tethered to having the first black president who's very well liked, who has everyday passes, becomes the most approved president of all time. So he has that going for him. But I also think it tells us the level of fear within the Democratic electorate. I think because reading up until practically the election was underway, there was, Hillary's definitely going to win. Like it's in the bag. It's certain. And seeing that not happen has instilled a lot of fear in the party. It totally has. And so as a result, I hear so many conversations about electability and not about actual policy. And that, to me, signals that the greatest thing, as I wrote about in the piece, that Trump has taken from the Democrats is a sense of hope. That a candidate, they know you have this old white dude that's in the office. The only person who could beat an old white dude is another old white dude. And so now they're just like, we just going with the old white dude. Because I find it just to give a short example, and I'll finish, is Kamala Harris, for example. She was a prosecutor. And in the black community, I've heard so many black people go at her because she was a prosecutor. She's a cop. She was imprisoning our people, this and that. Joe Biden wrote the crime bill, but you carrying his water. He wrote the crime bill that exploded mass incarceration, and he's still not sorry about it. But that's perfectly fine because you think the old white dude could beat the old white dude.
So, Adam, is that true? Is there like a PTSD going on then with the Democratic Party?
I think there is, in as much as I think it's something important though to say, in reference to what you were saying, Jamel. The reason Joe Biden is popular, and I completely agree that the circumstance, the geography of June 2020 will be totally unlike the geography of 2019, and we're naive or have a bad memory if we think otherwise. The reason Joe Biden is popular is because he was Barack Obama's vice president. That was the reason. If Joe Biden were still a senator from Delaware, he wouldn't be a significant candidate. He has, or is perceived to have, the blessing of, as you say, a still extraordinarily popular figure, who I should add too, I think, Jonathan, never was the subject of that kind of backbiting on the part of other Democrats. From the time he clinched the nomination in early 2008, if you recall, he worked hard to align with Hillary Clinton, who behaved in a very responsible way. They made a common cause. And from that time until the time he left office, I don't remember any Democrat really attacking Obama. I think Obama is an extraordinary figure of the power of a Democratic coalition to work successfully.
Sure, that one time.
Well, it was 8 years.
But hold on.
It was,
Who went after John Kerry? No one went after John Kerry. No one went after Al Gore. The debate that we're having is really everybody's so focused on 2016 and the Bernie folks who either didn't vote for Hillary Clinton or voted third party or stayed home, right? So we seem to be still fixated on 2016, but normally Democrats always unify behind their nominee. It's been very rare that they've had infighting.
Define unify. So once the person's the nominee, sure, I get your point. But let's not forget, there were a lot of Democrats who were pissed off at Bernie Sanders that he waited so long to finally endorse Hillary Clinton. That's the backbiting.
Right.
Yeah. Don't forget, in 2008, remember, there were the Hillary Clinton supporters.
The Pumas.
Who were so angry that Barack Obama won the nomination that they were like, I'm not voting for him. And so that is part of the mix. But let's not forget, the candidacy of President Obama, when he won Iowa, remember, there were a lot of black people who were having conversations out loud. Is he black enough? Yeah. Is he really black? Because, he's only half black and all of this other stuff. And the black part isn't even, that's Kenya.
Yeah, right.
But once
distant black, not...
Right. My own mother was I'm Hillary Clinton. Night of the Iowa caucuses, I call her, Mom, and all I hear from her is, Obama. Because she's old black woman, North Carolina, lived through Jim Crow. Never in her wildest dreams did she think that America, white people, would vote for Barack Obama. But once they did in Iowa, she was all on board. So President Obama, to my mind, is a unique moment. But when I was talking about what I was talking about, the one, there was knowing laughter in the audience because that's what Democrats do. They always do that.
Okay, so Art, if Iowa is the jumping off point, right? It gave Obama the credibility. It also was a harbinger for Bernie Sanders' continued success. We thought that Hillary Clinton was going to run away with the nomination until Iowa. Tell us a little bit about what's going on the ground there and how what happens in Iowa is going to help really determine who the nominee will ultimately end up being. Who wins in Iowa and how that factors in who wins the nomination.
Well, they used to say that there's 3 tickets out of Iowa, and this year there might be 5.
And 3 tickets meaning if you get first, second, or third,
win, place, and show.
You can make the case to New Hampshire, to Nevada, to South Carolina that you're real.
There's several candidates who are playing in different, like Kamala Harris is playing primarily in South Carolina, and Julian Castro spending a lot of time in Nevada, and everybody forgets about him, seriously, and so there might be 3, 4, 5 tickets out of Iowa, and remember, President Lieberman was the front runner, and so was President Santorum.
Right.
So everything's very fluid right now in Iowa, and the Democrats are showing up to forgotten places, in rural places. Elizabeth Warren launched her campaign in Steve King's district and planted her flag there and said, hey, Hillary didn't show up, but here I am. And Beto O'Rourke has a huge organizing force in Iowa. Yeah, he really does. And he's really digging into ag issues and climate change. John Delaney has 23 rural field organizers. And again, John Kerry was at 5%. 6 weeks out from the caucuses and ended up winning it.
What about Cory Booker?
Cory Booker, for some strange reason, is not really working rural areas hard, and he probably knows more about agriculture than any candidate in the race. And actually has roots in Iowa. From Bucks, his ancestors were coal miners in Iowa. But anyway, so it's very fluid. You could see one of 7 candidates, I think, really making a showing, and everybody laughs about it like a John Delaney or a Beto O'Rourke because they're 2% or whatever. But I wouldn't write them off.
That's fascinating.
Let's talk a little bit about who is driving the message right now. And it seems to me we have 2 issues here. One is, are Democrats just responding to the president? That their agenda is responding to whatever Trump's doing? Or are they being proactive enough, and can they continue to be proactive enough during the campaign to make it about what they want to talk about, not what Trump wants to talk about?
Well, that's where I think you, frankly, have to point a really large finger at the media. Because I've seen a number of the Democratic candidates address policy. We know Elizabeth Warren has a policy for everything, right? We know that. But I think that right now it's like pornography for television networks. Trump says something, Democrat X responds, and then everything gets lost. I mean, I think it would be unfair to say the Democrats didn't have a message,
right.
or that they weren't talking about health care and education and all these things, and student loans and all the things that matter to young and old voters. But I find that the cameras don't follow. Just because CNN doesn't show up doesn't mean they haven't talked about it.
That's right.
But the problem
so how
is
did they respond? That's right. That's the question, right?
Yeah.
How do you then, as a candidate, the Democratic nominee,
Well,
knowing that reality, that's going to keep happening.
So-
how do they succeed in that milieu?
I think this is also the reason why we are seeing Elizabeth Warren really gain some momentum, social media. And we've seen it with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the way she brilliantly uses social media. She understands that CNN or MSNBC or any of these other networks, they may not be interested in hearing what I have to say about healthcare, but she's making sure every day she has something for you to digest that's portable. And that's a really big weapon to have. And while, look, I know nothing can completely take the place of having blanket television coverage, as Trump proved before in the previous election. But I do think that there is something to be said for the power of social media and how it's drawing attention to these issues. Like Elizabeth Warren said on social media, her plan for canceling student debt. She started that conversation. And next thing you know, Bernie Sanders is. So they're seeing the real power that's there for them on the ground to directly talk to people and not have to rely on the networks.
I mean, I think the lesson from the 2018 midterm election, and this gets to my impeachment point, is that while we were all talking about, oh my God, Democrats are going to go for impeachment if Nancy Pelosi takes the gavel back, Democrats all around the country were running on health care. And they were so successful at running on health care that I think it was at the New York Times had a front page story about how Democrats have been running so successfully on health care that Republicans who were against things like protection for pre-existing conditions were running ads saying that they were for it. Like that they were going to do things in Congress to protect something that they had voted more than 60 times to eliminate. And so the lesson in that was, while we in the Acela corridor and on television were talking about whatever conversation we wanted to talk about, candidates all over the country in congressional districts were talking about issues that people on the ground care about. And so what I think Democrats would be wise to do is to, as much as they can, ignore the Twitter tirade that comes from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and from the RNC and from the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee, and keep doing what they're doing, and that is going to real people, real districts, and talking about real issues, because in the end, it's real people who are going to go into the voting booth, not someone who might be sitting on their sofa watching cable television.
But they also have to realize the receipts are on their side.
Right.
The Republicans and Trump have provided them with incredible receipts that they can pull at literally any time and use against them. So I think that'll be powerful.
Before, Adam, I want you to go, but as he's speaking, think about some questions, not speeches, not statements, but questions, because we're going to have microphones going around for our excellent panelists after Adam is finished. Go right ahead.
So, 2 things. One is, even within the Acela corridor, I thought one of the most interesting congressional races, which I got to view close up and firsthand, was that of Max Rose
Absolutely.
in Staten Island.
Absolutely.
My son was one of the managers. I will declare an interest. But what was fascinating, that was the deepest red district in not only in all of New York City, but in some ways New York State.
is Staten
it
Island.
was Staten Island. It was the people who work for Tony Soprano are basically the that district. They were 40 points behind in terms of the previous election. And Max Rose was an extraordinary candidate. He was an Afghanistan war veteran who ran a populist campaign against Bill de Blasio, the progressive mayor of New York, against Nancy Pelosi, but strong on health care, strong on economic issues. And above all, and I thought this was very significant, and it was one of the things that my son's generation, who were banging on doors, I had to learn, strong on patriotism. That was, above all, his identity as a soldier and as a man of service, was his adhesive, his mucilage with the people on Staten Island. They ran that campaign, a patriotic, populist, progressive campaign, and they won by 6 points. They turned a 40-point deficit around to 6 points. For me, that's a more significant campaign than almost any other, because it wasn't a case of changing the temperature within a Democratic district. It was totally overturning a deeply Republican district by finding another way to campaign.
Right.
Just to add one quick thought, though, I think there's a deep divide, and I don't know how we bridge it, not between people, but in this kind. Everybody who's ever experienced the nightmare of an ethnic nationalist in power will tell you you can't get him out by being an ethnic nationalist of another kind yourself. You have to say the mail's not being delivered, the checks are not being written, it's inefficient, and that's how Berlusconi was defeated in Italy, for instance. It wasn't by another charismatic candidate. The risk with that, it always seems to me, or it seems to me right now, is that you risk further normalizing the Trump's behavior, in plain English, that you risk by running an ordinary campaign as though this were 2004, 2008, you allow that horrific and toxic process by which behavior that is not only not normal, but has never even been begun to be broached by any leading politician, not just in the United States, but in any democratic country. The reason why Trump didn't break the law by colluding with the Russians is because no one ever stopped to think that someone would do that, that they would work that closely with a foreign power, and there is no law to cover it because it was not something that anyone foresaw as a possibility. I think that somewhere in walking that tightrope,
I thought the law was called treason, but
well, yes. But I mean, not to go too deep in the weeds about this, the reason they didn't want to write a treason law at the founders didn't is because they knew how easily a treason law could be used against dissidents. It had been that way in England all along. So they didn't write a law that said you really cannot have 100 meetings with a hostile foreign power to do in your adversary. That's not good. We won't call it Trojan, right? Because we won't go all the way to treason. Anyway, I think that's a problem.
Thank you, Adam. Let's take a couple questions if we can. I can't see anybody. So just FYI. So, right, in the back, where if the microphone's coming to you. Hello.
I guess I have the microphone. My name's Larry Gelman. I'm from Tucson, Arizona, where I'm working my butt off for Mark Kelly. And
Candidate for Senate, by the way, in Arizona, Democratic candidate.
the world's best husband and a fighter pilot and an astronaut.
Husband of Gabby
But,
Giffords.
in any event, when I talked to Mark a couple days ago, and he is not a politician, he's out on the road and learning it. Gabby's a politician. But he said to me, there are 3 priorities for the people of Arizona, and I think it's a microcosm of the United States. Healthcare, healthcare, and healthcare. That's all people are talking to me about. Now, as I watch cable news and listen to all of the people inside the Beltway talk about all of these little things that they have to come up with to make it seem like there's less than 17 months till the election, I would like to throw it back to you and say, at the end of the day, do you think that's an accurate read?
Guys, what do you think about healthcare being
Absolutely.
the defining issue? So, yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about being on the ground in Iowa, and also help us define what does that mean. People say healthcare. That means a lot of things to a lot of different people. What does that mean to people you are talking to in your community when they say healthcare is a top priority?
that there was a good story, I think maybe, was it in the Washington Post, about it's not so much about accessibility as it is about cost. And I don't know that Medicare for All is selling real well in Iowa, since Des Moines is the health insurance capital of the country. And but the public option is very much alive, and it's the number one. Interesting, again, the highly respected Iowa poll conducted by Ann Selzer, it's the gold standard of political polling, shows that the two top issues for Iowa likely caucus goers are number one, health care, and number two, climate change. And health care was definitely the driving issue in the 2018 election. It's all about price. I'm having cataract surgery coming up, and I'm paying all of it out of pocket because I have a $5,000 deductible on my insurance policy. And I have to pay $150 for a preparatory antibiotic drug before the surgery because the insurance won't cover it. And I have Wellmark, Blue Cross Blue Shield. And people, and especially poor people, just cannot afford to go to the doctor.
Yeah, I'm come from Canada, and I did a debate for the Washington Monthly in 1999 for Canadian-style Medicare in America. I debated my dear friend Malcolm Gladwell, who was at that time a libertarian. He has since seen sense and remembered his Canadian past. The thing that I always hear and read is because as someone who has lived in Canada and been ill in Canada, and as someone who's also lived in France and watched a baby being born in France under another kind of national health insurance, is that the polling is great, and the people here are more expert on the fine points here. The polling is great on Medicare for all until you tell people that they're going to take away their private insurance. And that then that's the moment. And whether that's an addiction of habit because we're accustomed to having private insurance, or it's actually a rational evaluation that I would rather not have my health insurance being handled by the same people who run the DMV, which is not
I know
crazy.
it's not. Absolutely,
It's not crazy. I'm not entirely sure.
I agree. Absolutely. Let's get another person here. Can we? I don't know if there are folks. Can we get you right here? Yeah. Great.
I think Trump was elected by about, the evangelical vote was about 80% to Trump, or white evangelical. What do you think the Dems can do to get more evangelical voters? Because I think putting children in cages is not biblical, right? And
You
immigration.
would think Jesus would say no to that, huh?
I kind of do.
You would
but I
think.
guess, what do the Dems do? Do they share their faith more?
That's a very good question about whether Democrats should share their faith more. I mean, of all the people among the 25, the two who come to mind who openly share their faith are Mayor Pete and Senator Booker. But what's happening in our name on the border goes beyond religion and spirituality and faith. I mean, it's a moral issue, but it's also a character issue about who we are as a country. And when it comes to, and I want to make this distinction, and I'm glad you made the distinction, white evangelicals, I don't know if there's any Democrat who could appeal to them. I mean, so those white evangelicals who went into the voting booth to vote for him in November 2016 had heard the grab 'em by the meow meow tape. They heard about the other accusations against him. They knew all these things. I'm old enough to remember.
They knew about 2 Corinthians.
Right. I'm old enough to remember when evangelicals were lecturing Democrats about how godless they were because they accepted their LGBTQ neighbors, friends, colleagues, relatives. And these are the same people who voted for the president. And these are the same people who are still probably will still vote for the president, not maybe because they think he's a fine gentleman, but I think because they love those two Supreme Court seats that they got, and looking for maybe 2 more.
Don't you think, Jonathan? I think something Art said before was vital, and that was that the key issue was abortion. really. And that's
That's my judge's point.
yeah, exactly. And that Roe v. Wade and abortion. And like it or not, that's a kind of unbridgeable gulf. No matter, Barack Obama was a man of profound faith, and it didn't make a difference in that way. Because no Democratic candidate can be pro-life. I think that that's an impossibility, pro-life in that sense. And I think that that's simply not only not a practical, it's not an ethical or moral possibility for a Democratic
We also,
candidate.
too, have to, I think because they profess a faith and because they're evangelical, we assume that they're not about consolidation of power. And they are absolutely about consolidation of power and not about religious tolerance, but religious dominance. There's a difference. So with that being the case, I always often say this in referring to, we all know those people that just like to argue. Can't negotiate with terrorists sometimes. You just can't. And so I just don't, like you said, given what the deep divide in approach, philosophy, morality is, I don't know if that gap can be bridged.
Art, please.
If I may, among young evangelicals, the number one issue is water quality, believe it or not. And among Trump persuadables, it's water quality. If you don't talk climate change, but you talk water quality.
And not for baptism purposes.
Well, maybe. Maybe the River Jordan is getting pretty goddamn murky. A lot of turbidity there. All those people dunking. But no, but really, again, that information comes from Seltzer, and she did focus groups with Trump persuadables, and if you put, they were Obama Trump voters, and if you don't talk about climate change, but you talk about water quality and soil erosion, all of a sudden you talk about natural resource depredation, and young evangelicals are moved by the environment.
That's a
And
language they speak.
And isn't that what you won your Pulitzer for?
It was.
Yes, it is. Okay, so there we go. I'm sorry to say, all you who have raised your hand, that we are out of time. But these fine people, they're around. You can read them. You can read their Twitter. You can see them on television.
You can buy them drinks.
Please, you can buy them drinks.
Hey now.
Adam, great.
You can
pitch.
read their books.
You can read their books. Why don't you make your pitch, Art?
Storm Lake, a chronicle of change,
There we
resilience,
go.
and hope from a Heartland newspaper.
You can buy
Viking.
it. You can buy it on Amazon at any
You can
time.
buy it right here.
Right here in Aspen. Thank you, please, to my panelists. Thank you, everybody, for coming.